Hello, my name is Ronald Mitchell and I'm a partner with the architecture firm Moody Nolan. Let me begin by extending greetings to the greater Northwestern University campus community, consisting of currently enrolled students, faculty, staff, and alumni. I would also like to express my firm's deep appreciation and gratitude at being selected by Northwestern University for this most important assignment, to reimagine the Black House and its use for future generations of students of color. For nearly 50 years, the Black House has served as an icon for campus life, and as a consequence, it holds a place near and dear in the hearts and minds of alumni and current students alike. We began our work in the fall of 2016 following our selection. However, conversations about the Black House, as well as broader conversations about Black student experience and Black student life on campus, began far earlier. Northwestern University commissioned a panel of students, faculty, staff, and alumni to take the pulse of Black student life on campus, as well as to further examine the existing Black House facility, both from the perspective of how it's currently utilized and with an eye towards its future disposition. Their work serves as the springboard for the feasibility study performed by Moody Nolan. In commencing our efforts, we thought it important to understand the diaspora of the Black student experience throughout the years at Northwestern, overlaying a number of significant milestones in the lives of Black students across the spectrum of the campus timeline. These contributions have been significant and varied, and provide further context to the concerns raised during the engagement phase of this report. Our early campus engagements involved a series of town hall meetings where Moody Nolan sought to develop our own understanding of the Black student experience at Northwestern, as well as how the existing Black House facility is utilized by students. And while several themes emerged from these conversations, they can be distilled down to a handful of key issues, some of which candidly may or may not be addressable within the context of a building project, but nonetheless offer significant insight into the Black student experience and will serve as a guidepost for how we approach design in the days ahead. Amongst the most interesting facts we learned during these early days of engagement was the fact that there is a precipitous drop-off in the use of the Black House facility as students matriculate through their college experience. We learned that freshmen and sophomores tend to highly utilize the facility, and seemingly after developing their own identity and sense of comfort on campus, the utilization of the Black House tends to drop off precipitously as students approach upperclassmen status. Armed with this broad understanding, we then sought to engage stakeholders in a more meaningful dialogue about the programming of the Black House. And again, while several themes were discussed, we were able to distill down to a number of key themes and key concerns on the part of stakeholders. Universally expressed across the stakeholder spectrum was a need for the Black House to serve as a safe space, a safe haven, as it were, for students and candidly faculty of color. The environment was to feel home-like, while at the same time being flexible in its use, being able to be used for student gatherings as well as individual contemplative use as well. There was a desire for the space and environment to be welcoming, both to students of color as well as those from the broader community, while at the same time, creating a sense of timelessness, one that could span across generations and across the ages. From the themes expressed, several design drivers emerged, and amongst those, The need for the Black House to be welcoming from its approach. Your first experience as you enter needed to be one that welcomed both students of color as well as those from the broader campus community. There was great importance placed on telling the story of the Black House to honor its legacy, as it were. There was a desire to have a delineation between student-focused space versus visitor space. Similar delineations were desired between comfortable furniture versus space to perhaps rest and recuperate. And also the need for adequate storage space for student organizations, particularly those focused on color. From these design drivers, Moody Nolan then began to develop a broad space program in draft form, looking at a lot of the space ideas expressed by the stakeholder groups, and then prioritizing those in terms of what was heard and learned the most throughout the learning and listening sessions. A couple of key themes emerged from this as well. The desire for living room space, the desire for a student or Black African American heritage-centric student resource center, private study rooms, meeting spaces, computer labs were all amongst the program space types that were desired to be incorporated or be improved in the Black House. After developing the draft space program, Moody Nolan then commenced the process of conceptual design. Conceptual design typically begins with a big idea, a primary thought. And in the case of the Black House, what we learned from students was that there was this connection, this synergy between legacy and future. And Moody Nolan sought to try to express this synergy in a way that would be easy to comprehend and at the same time capture the essence of what we thought we heard from the stakeholders. And so this notion of this transformative car, where you see, at the front end, a classic vehicle that then, as you progress from left to right, morphs into something more modern, more sleek, became the design big idea for this project. We started to ask ourselves, what if the Black House could take on this identity, this persona, and have its experience transform and morph in a seamless sort of manner, as you navigated your way through the facility. Our next step in this process was to then go back to our draft space program and start to look for synergies within it, and also to start to pare down some of the ideas expressed into more practical, pragmatic chunks. And so, as we listened to stakeholders, three key themes emerged in terms of the Black House's primary focuses or uses. One being, it should be a place of relaxation. It should be a place where students or users can focus. And lastly, it should be a place where users could play and create and express their more creative side. And so in looking at the draft program, we started to see and identify natural linkages or synergies between spaces that promoted these various ideas. In looking for synergies within program, we also began to think about the project from a sustainability perspective. The very nature of adaptive reuse and renovation is inherently sustainable. However, we want to challenge ourselves as we move forward to look for best practices in terms of making the Black House both economically sustainable, physically sustainable in terms of the use of materials, and lastly, energy sustainable in its consumption of energy. The next step in the conceptualization process was to re-engage the campus community in a dialogue about how spaces might be utilized within the Black House. Beginning by reminding ourselves of some of the key concerns heard early on in the engagement process, we then set about having stakeholder groups then do an exercise in self-determination, or stated differently, we refer to them in the architectural vernacular as charrettes, where we pull a group of folks together to ideate around strategies in hopes of building consensus around an idea. This was the case with the Black House, in that we assigned groups the responsibility of beginning to program the Black House as they saw fit, challenging them in the process to debate and discuss appropriate uses as well as appropriate space types. And what we learned through this process was that there was tremendous synergy amongst the groups in terms of how the Black House should be utilized. Starting with the basement spaces and eventually working vertically throughout the house to the top levels, each group was tasked with starting to appropriate space as it saw fit. And what you see depicted here in these images are what the various groups came up with. Armed with the intelligence gathered from the charrette exercise, Moody Nolan then set upon the process of synthesizing the data to see where synergies existed. And what we found, as you'll see depicted in this stacking diagram, was consensus was developed around the notion that there should be both a vertical, and to a certain extent, horizontal segregation of space within the Black House. Working from the lower level to the uppermost level, the focus of the spaces transition from, play and create, focus, to relaxation on the lower levels, to more focus, transition focus relaxed spaces on the upper levels. We found this to be consistent with the dialogue that we heard earlier regarding, creating space that was, at all times safe and yet welcoming for visitors at the same time. Quiet to allow for contemplative activities and yet at the same time welcoming for guests. Then cleaning up the diagrams prepared by the various stakeholder groups, Moody Nolan then started to arrange spaces in such a way that would begin to inform an architectural floor plan. Again, moving from the lower level spaces to the upper levels, you can see how the stakeholder group's vision begins to manifest itself within the existing Black House footprint. Again, transitioning to the second floor, where the transition from relaxation to more focus-driven type spaces begins to occur. And then lastly, on the third floor, being primarily focus and relaxation driven, allowing for students to retreat from the lower level environment. From this process, Moody Nolan began the final concept design. Concept design being the beginnings of translating all of the discussions, all of the programmatic ideas into an early manifestation or representation of architecture. And so here you start to see for the first time how those space diagrams translate themselves into architectural expression. On the basement level, you can see, aside from the rudimentary mechanical and storage and restroom spaces, again, the play and create focus being practice spaces, multi-purpose spaces, and creative spaces, comprising the majority of the usable square footage on the basement level. You'll also note the incorporation of an elevator into the Black House. This serves a dual purpose of both providing fully accessible spaces at all levels, in addition to the practical need to be able to transport goods throughout the house. Conceptual renderings were developed as well to help stakeholders visualize what could be in the various spaces. And so what you see here depicted on the lower level is a manifestation of what could be a multi-purpose environment. We show opportunities for recreation in the form of a pool table, a billiards table. Also, to enhance flexibility, we actually have spaces that are divided by garage door, allowing for space to be segregated or opened up depending on what type of function or use is happening. As we move up to the first floor, this represents the welcoming point for visitors and students alike. The main entry to the house does not change. However, once you enter the home, you're immediately greeted by a welcoming station with a receptionist of sorts. And from there, you have the option of proceeding to the back of the house or proceeding to any number of flexible open spaces that could be utilized. You have a large great room here available to you that could serve as both a living room environment as well as a welcoming environment for visiting alumni. The great room space also opens and connects to a kitchen dining area, allowing the opportunity to either segregate or keep open the two spaces together, facilitating either larger group or smaller group functions. As you arrive at the rear of the house, a new porch has been introduced to the design, allowing for gathering on the rear on the exterior for social activity. As you can see in this next image, you see the representation of that expanded kitchen space with views back into the great room. Again, allowing for maximum flexibility of use and being able to host larger events as well as segregate the two spaces off for more intimate ones. In the next image, you see conceptually depicted the great room, with an effort and eye towards maintaining the original grandeur of the Black House while at the same time introducing modern amenities. The glass doors depicted here connect to the kitchen that you saw in the previous rendering, while bookcases and bar stool elements harken back to the older days of the Black House. As you move to the second floor, as mentioned earlier, this is where the transition from relaxation to more focus-centered spaces occur. And so upon arrival on the second floor, much of the space is either office, or meeting dedicated, even though there is a lounge off of the grand staircase for folks to socialize. There's also a smaller roof deck porch available for smaller social gathering as well. During earlier programmatic conversations with stakeholders, one of the ideas expressed was the importance of preserving the integrity of the grand staircase. And so in keeping with this, our thought was to actually open that staircase up to the extent possible and actually express its architectural grandeur. And so the staircase actually is open all the way to the roof above. And so you experience 3 full stories of the stairs' grandeur and height, as opposed to the very closed and claustrophobic experience currently available. Art was also incorporated into the design of the space, with a focus towards African or Afrocentric artistic artifacts. The other important driver was to try to introduce as much daylight into the interior environment as possible. And so you'll see glass walls have been introduced in targeted or select spaces to allow for the infusion of natural daylight from the perimeter windows to infiltrate itself into the inner core of the house. As you move to the third floor, again, the focus theme continues, but now there's the incorporation of relaxation space. So a large meditation room flanks the front corner, or directionally speaking, the southeast corner of the house, while additional private meeting and study spaces are also incorporated. The aerial image provides a view of the Black House in the broader surrounding campus context. And so you see the Black House positioned here in all of its grandeur. In keeping with the image of the car, the big idea image that you saw earlier in the presentation, our design focus for the rear addition was to have the architecture integrate seamlessly into the existing Victorian structure, while at the same time expressing itself as a modern element. And so complementary roof geometry and forms are utilized. However, the facade materials are more modern in nature, giving the rear of the Black House a more new, sleek feel. A rear porch, as mentioned earlier, has also been incorporated to allow for outdoor social gathering. And within that porch, platform seating has also been provided to allow for passerby or well as passive gathering of students or users alike. This concluded the conceptual design and feasibility phase of our efforts. But as we transition into next steps, we do so with an eye towards schematic design. That is, translating concept into actual architecture. In doing so, we'll seek to accomplish three primary objectives. One, we'll look to refine the space program and establish budget priorities for the project. This includes developing scope and budgetary alternates, as well as prioritizing space types. In earlier conversations with stakeholders, as you'll recall, a number of ideas were expressed as far as how the Black House would be optimally used. During schematic design, you start to refine those thoughts and start to apply them to what the architecture can actually absorb. We'll also start to look to develop a brand identity for the design. This will be accomplished both through the use of environmental graphics as well as developing the interior finish palette for the Black House. And then lastly, on the municipal front, we'll start to engage municipal authorities, the City of Evanston, and start to deal with and address historic preservation concerns as well as building permitting concerns. Your feedback will be vital to this process as we seek to instill Northwestern values into the project's DNA. We look forward to future engagements with you